Oh man. Good morning. Well, afternoon, depending where let's pull it out. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever's listening, no matter what time you're listening, no matter what time you're watching. You now feel welcomed. Hi, hello. I am Crunk Chocolate. I'm here with my showgirl Tom Baum. How are you?
It's been too long, been a long time. Shouldn't have left you without a dope pop to listen to. So we about to get into it.
And as you teams are doing their friendlies. They're playing teams outside of their country, city men. They're in Korea right now. We have city women soon. They're going to be going to Italy. So we figured, why not reach out to our good friends at the Women's Football Chat and just have a nice conversation. This is the first time we've been able to uh, have them on the pod, do a collaboration. So very excited about this. Hello, gents. How are you? Feel free to introduce yourself. Let our listeners, our viewers know you and your names.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jack from the Women's Football Chat. This is Harry. We do a weekly women's football show. We do a lot of women's football content, to be fair. And yeah, I mean, this is very much our pre-season tour, isn't it? We're coming across the pond. We're getting ready for the new season, talking to you guys. But yeah, very excited. It has been far too long without WSL action, obviously without a major tournament as well. It's been a very quiet summer. I mean, it has an off the pitch, to be fair, a lot of transfer action, but yeah, missing it.
Yeah, I was going to say the transfers have helped kept us ticking over, but yeah, it's good to be getting closer to the start of the season and kind of getting back to a bit of normality.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of your content popping up, and that was half the reason why I was like, I need to reach out to them. Like good on them. They're keeping themselves busy. I love that you do a good job. As you said, you're the women's football chat. Like you are English, you do cover the women's league in England, but I will see you talking about other leagues and other situations, and that I find that actually more in women's football, where just the general fan is more knowledgeable about different leagues and their setups, as opposed to men's leagues. You tend to find people who are just like homers to their leagues and they love their leagues, they love their play, and honestly, it's like they love their club. And then once you get out of there, especially if it's the like relegation fodder types of clubs, they're just like, I don't know, they exist, bro. So I'm super excited to join in this conversation, listen, learn, hopefully get a little chaos takes out of these two, because I want to start off with specifically Michelle King. I saw, well, everyone has noticed uh, the movement that has been happening in, as Tom Baum said before we recorded, the Kang fiefdom, the clubs that she owns. Uh, this what's going on with London City Lioness is insane. Also owns Lyonnaise. The whole conversation, like, as us with City fans and City Football Group, we know that there was like a problem with City and Girona in it at the same time a few years ago, and movements had to happen. Michelle King is trying to make it where London City are in a position to be in the Champions League next season. But what does that mean for Lyonnais? We can get to that part of it, but just in general with Michelle King, her throwing the money around, uh, making the moves that she did, I saw that, you know, I just left it as help or hindrance. I don't want to lead the witness before you guys talk. So just from that help or hindrance, what are your thoughts on the Michelle King of it all and her actions?
I think it's a very nuanced conversation. I think broadly, though, the biggest thing that I find interesting about Michelle Kang is that you've got a situation when we talk about multi club ownership in the men's league, it's a very different context to talk about it in the women's game because of the situation that clubs find themselves in, because we've got much smaller leagues and a lot less leagues. It is easier to almost form this monopoly in leagues. And I think the biggest question at the moment is how quickly can London City become competitive at the top? Because even in when we look at the men's game, we're talking about multi-club ownership there. Even clubs like Manchester City, who obviously have the City Football Group, Chelsea trying to build something there, and we've got a few clubs that are doing that. But no one is able to build this monopoly in multiple different leagues. And I think the other big thing is that when we look at those English Premier League clubs that are doing it, it's different because with a lot of those cases, they're using these clubs as feeders. So you send players to Girona, they develop there, they come back to City and play for the first team. The big difference here is that we've now got in England a situation where London City have came in and they're getting players from OL Lyonnais. And so I think that creates a very different situation where rather than having a club who are already established, then buying another team to send their players to, from an English perspective, you've now got a club that are receiving those players. And we saw that with the Diani signing in particular. I mean, obviously, it's been well documented that Michelle Kang is very interested in Barcelona players, and we're seeing that with Putellas and Leon. And I don't necessarily think there's anything massively wrong with that because she was just offering a more competitive rate than Barcelona were. When you look at Diani, when you look at her signing players between the two clubs, that's where I feel like potentially it crosses the line into a problem, because you've then got a situation where, because I think Diani went for under market value, £500,000. When we look at the current market, that's below her valuation. And so you've got a situation there where they're kind of able to get away with moves like that. And that's where I think you're probably reaching a bit of a hindrance.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I think that it's the other thing with these kind of groups of football clubs is that with City doing what they do with the likes of Girona, they're almost helping them out. They're making them stronger. Whereas this is kind of, it's very, very targeted from Michelle Kang. It's helping other clubs, but it's also weakening the other big teams. And I think that it's been very interesting to see how this balance is going to continue between her trying to have so many elite clubs, because it is going to, I feel like it's going to start hurting the other leagues, because she's going to, rather than supplementing them and making the whole division stronger, it's going to, her clubs, similar to how Lyonnais have done in the French league, they've kind of really taken control of that. And if she starts doing that in every top division, then, I mean, women's football will be dominated by Michelle Kang, and I don't know how interesting that's going to be for all of us to watch.
And I think with Lyonnais in particular, I mean, a lot of the English fans talk about London City and go, well, even if London City gets to the top, surely these other clubs can outspend them. But then you look at Lyonnais with PSG, and she's outspending and outinvesting a team owned by a Qatari state. So in terms of that, can these other clubs compete with the investment of London City Lionesses? Hopefully, with the regulations around profit and sustainability, that is going to stop it to a certain extent, because there is now a cap on wages. But eventually they are going to be able to bring in the revenue, and there's ways to manipulate that. They can have inflated sponsorships and stuff like that. So they'll find ways around it, and it's going to become a question of how long will those other clubs be able to compete with London City.
I think I like, Jack, what you said, that this is a very nuanced conversation. And I think I wanted to focus specifically on London City, because my read on the players that they brought in was that this season is like, we're running up to the World Cup for 2027. And if you look at the players that she brought in, all of them are players that have injury histories, in like with Diani, with, Mapi Leon, with, Alexia Putellas. So essentially, these are players that have been used to playing those Champions League matches and playing in their league matches. So they're going to be fresher for the World Cup than they would be if they would have stayed in the clubs that they were in. Do you agree or disagree with it?
I think that's a very interesting point. But actually, when you look at, because Barcelona was so dominant in Liga F, not only were their star players not having to play every game, but even when they were playing those matches, if you were 2-3-0 up with half an hour to go, that last 30 minutes is a lot lower tempo and much easier to play through. With London City, these players are going to be relied on to play every single match in the WPLL, which is a much more physical league. You're also going from an environment where Barcelona are far and away the best team in Liga F. So if you're playing anyone other than Real Madrid and possibly Atletico, though even then that is incredibly one-sided. Even Real Madrid game is very one-sided. That's a very different game to London City, who in most of the matches are going to be up against it, or at the very least it's going to be a very competitive game. And maybe when they're playing Charlton, Birmingham, Crystal Palace, Everton, West Ham, maybe some of those sides in the bottom half of the table, they'll be okay. But 8 times a season they're going to be playing one of the top 4. Clubs like Brighton, Liverpool and Tottenham are all sides that are going to make it very difficult for them. So yeah, on one hand, yes, they won't be playing in the Champions League, and that is going to help them, but they're also going to be playing every game in the WSL, which they weren't having to do in Liga F. They're going to be playing every game in the League Cup, and I think that is one where, because the Champions League teams aren't in it, I think that's one that London City will really target this year. And they're going to be playing the FA Cup, which I think is another tournament they'll want to go far in. So actually the minutes might not look too different. And I think you could actually argue the other way. So this is where the nuance comes in, because, yeah, we could see them not having to compete right at the top level, and that helps them stay less injured. But equally, there isn't going to be as much rotation, I don't expect. They've got a very big squad, but I don't see Putas being benched for many games this season, so Kafaji can get minutes. So that's going to be really interesting to see whether, because they're playing 90 minutes, whether there is actually much of a difference there at all.
I think it's quite likely, and I think that a scenario that could definitely play out is that we see all of the new signings play every single minute of every game through the first couple of months of the season, and then they all end up getting injured again because of the fitness struggles that you mentioned, and then they end up missing the season, and we don't see that kind of impact they would expect. But yeah, I think the way they balance it is be very, very interesting with those fitness injuries, because those players aren't going to be able to come in. I don't expect them to be able to come in and play every single game right through to the end of the season. So I think that the balance and the management of the fitness is going to be very key to trying to get the best out of them. And as you say, a lot of those players who will want to be fit and ready to play in the World Cup next year, is that what are they going to be more focused on making sure they keep fit? Are they going to be wanting to be playing every game? I think it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about the moving players from like Lyonnais to LCL, being able to move players under the price where they would be going if the team wasn't under her ownership. That is very interesting. That is kind of the one negative knock. That kind of it is a huge negative knock. I'm not necessarily a fan. Actually, I'm a fan of what she's doing. Obviously, the two teams, I'm interested to see how that will go, because when Girona made Champions League, the rule was City had to sell below, I think it was like 32.5% ownership. So they just weren't a majority owner. I know sometimes ownership will put a board to take over, so they have no control over it. Like, there are ways around it. I will be interested to see how she's gonna have to do that for UWCL if she gets that spot, because even so, like, all things have to go well this season, and then if they don't get, what is it, top 4, because I'm sure they'll take any of the other, they just want to be anywhere the competition. And then if they don't get into it for next season, how many years can LCL go with spending this money, paying these fees for these players, and not getting into the champion? Like, there are still so many steps that need to happen before we really even need to have the conversation, but people are like preemptively having those conversations. And I think that's what kind of is like demonizing Michelle Kang, because it was just like, we're not even here yet. Like, we should be able to enjoy the experience that is Michelle Kang, at least, that in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how quick London City get there. I don't see it as a problem this year, as you say, but they're going to have that aspiration to get into the Champions League because of the money they're spending. The players that, Alexia Putellas, as much as she claims she doesn't want to compete with Barcelona, she's not gone to London City to not play in the Champions League. So, yeah, I think that will be a goal for probably the season after this one. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I think the other big difference, because you mentioned Girona there with Man City, the other big difference is that Girona were never considered as someone that could go and win the Champions League. They were a decent side who were able to compete there. But if London City get there, London City should be a side, and all the English clubs really should be teams that are getting to the latter stage of the competition, are in that conversation to win it. And so that then does open up a bigger conversation, because if London City play Lyonnais in the quarterfinals, in the semi-final, that represents a massive conflict of interest. And so I think that would be the biggest difference, the fact that she wants to have two competitive sides, not one big competitive side and then another team that kind of feeds that club. She wants to have two teams competing right at the top. And so that, I think, opens up the bigger question. And additionally, when we've got the Club World Cup coming up, you could have a situation where Washington Spirit, London City and Lyonnais are all in there together, could all even be in the same group or something like that. So you could have some quite farcical situations there, which I think then would question the integrity. But UEFA have been pretty firm on saying they're not going to allow it in the women's game. Equally, they've said that before in the men's game, and then it turns out not to be the case. So I think it's just a case of waiting and seeing when London City get into the Champions League, if they get into the Champions League, and how UEFA then handle it once that happens.
I'm not sure that she's going to have to worry about that conflict of interest with Washington Spirit. If this previous CONCACAF club championship goes the way that, or the future one goes the way the previous one went, the Liga MX feminine teams will probably surprise a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, the Liga MX is very strong, to be fair. But I think, I mean, we saw with the last Club World Cup, and it will happen with the women's one as well, so in the men's game, where actually teams that didn't win the Champions League in those respective continents got in. And so I expect we'll see similar to that. I mean, at the moment in UEFA, it's very likely that Chelsea and Lyonnais will be there automatically the next Club World Cup, even if they don't win the next two editions of the Champions League, because they're so high in the coefficient rankings. So, yeah, absolutely. At the moment, they're not going to be in there, but I mean, that would be the aspiration for Michelle Kang to have them there.
Well, we'll continue the whole UWCL of it all, just because we can get after this. We'll talk about just the movement in general in football and in the WSL, but talk about moves made by London City. So Tottenham, they have done some stuff. Arsenal, they're starting to finally figure some things out. The UWCL has been dominated by, in the last 12 years. Barca's won the last 4 of the 6 competitions, and then Lyon has won 6 of the last 11. It's been one-sided for the most part, well, two-sided. All these moves from the WSL to give themselves a better chance in their own eyes. Is it just, again, up to Lyon or Barca this season? Like, is that what we're all to expect? Like, who is there a dark horse? I mean, there's always dark horses, so I guess I should ask, who are your dark horses? Who are your hopes to remove Lyon and Barca from the top of the WCL?
I think that if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be a club from England, as we saw with Arsenal a couple of years ago. They went on a magical run and somehow managed to beat Barca in that final. An incredible achievement for them. So it does feel weird to talk about the likes of Chelsea and Arsenal and obviously Man City back in the Champions League. It feels weird to talk about them as underdogs because obviously they're winning the league in England. But as you say, with that dominance, it would be a surprise if one of those three went on to win it, especially for Chelsea and City, who have never won it. So I think you're definitely looking at, if anyone's going to stop them, it's going to be the 3 English clubs. I think that Bayern Munich are always in and around there. It's a shame that we've seen clubs like Wolfsburg had a really bad summer. So despite being historically good and despite the fact they beat Lyonnais in the first leg of that quarter-final last season, I don't think they're going to be there. So, yeah, I think you're mainly looking at the English clubs, maybe Bayern Munich, but I think we've seen the smaller clubs from around Europe have been putting up some decent fights, especially with the new format. So I don't think it'll be as cut and dry or as easy as it usually has been for Barcelona or Lyonnais, but I think that it hopefully will get a bit more of a challenge at the very least, at least in the knockout stages.
Yeah, I think that's a really good chance for an English club this year. For me, the biggest reason that Lyonnais and Barcelona have been so dominant is because they face lack of competition in their domestic league. And when we look at Arsenal winning it, in that season, they were able to kind of throw away the WSL at the end of the campaign because they had no chance of winning the league. And they were kind of secure in getting Champions League football because City weren't really there, because they had all those injuries. So Arsenal were able to throw away, and we saw them have some pretty poor performances. I think they got beaten like 5-2 and something like that by Brighton and Aston Villa. They had an awful run at the end of that season, and because they just rested and focused solely on the Champions League, they were able to go all the way, and they beat Barcelona in that final. Now, I still think Barcelona were the stronger team, but they were able to be in a much better position to compete because of that. And I think this season, because we've got 3 WSL teams who should be in the Champions League, obviously Chelsea still have to go through qualifiers, we should have 3 WSL teams in the Champions League. Not all of them can win the WSL title. And I don't really see a world in which we're getting to April and all 3 of them are still in for it. So that does create a situation where I think the top 3 will be able to build a decent gap this season to the rest of the league. And then I think from there down, it's a bit of chaos. So it's very interesting to see. But I think that could help one of the English clubs win it. If it's a situation where Arsenal or Man City are competing for the title, for example, I think Chelsea would probably throw all their eggs into the Champions League basket because they've never won it before. I think likewise for all the big 3 clubs, even Arsenal who've won it before, if they can't win the WSL, they might as well switch their focus and their attention to the Champions League. So I think there's a really good opportunity. I also think that we're kind of going into a season where Barcelona and Lyonnais are both weakened somewhat. Now, I know Lyonnais have signed Tama Pariuelo, but I think the issues they had last season defensively are still there. I think losing Heaps is a massive loss in terms of character in the dressing room. And I think Diani's an excellent player. And while they can move around that front 3 to make up for that loss, I worry about their defensive side of their game. I think with Barcelona, I mean, there's so many losses there. Their starting 11 is still, for me, the strongest. It's close, but I think it's still the strongest. But they have basically no depth. And so a major injury this season to Bonmati or Guiardo or Eva Payor, I think would put them in a really difficult spot. I mean, either way, their defensive partnership is going to be 35-year-old Paredes and injury-prone Alexandri. And the backups to that are Martina Fernandez, who was at Everton last year, and Rene Van Asten, who is 19 years old and has only played one season of senior football. So yeah, there's a lot of questions there on Barcelona. Any sort of injuries, and I think they're in big trouble. It's the same situation as last year, but I think it's got much worse, obviously, with the amount of players they've lost this summer, and the fact they haven't really been able to replace them.
I would say my dark horse is definitely Bayern. We've talked about Wolfsburg declining with having a terrible window this summer. I think that Bayern might enter that territory of Liga FE or the French league, in where like it's just going to be that one team dominating, and you just have to worry about maybe one other club. So maybe that will allow Bayern to rotate a lot. I think one of the I didn't think about it, Jack, until you were talking about their Lyon's defensive moves. One of those switches from a Kang team, Wissa Sangari, her loan for London City ended, and she's going back to Lyonnais this season. So I wonder if we see more of her with Tarsiani together. I know that Sambath departed to Spurs, which I think is a really good get for them. But I would have to say Bayern is probably my dark horse for possibly winning this.
Yeah, I think Bayern's a great shout. I really like a lot of their squad. I think they've got some quality players, particularly Clara Buell is a world-class player. I think if Lena Oberdorf can stay fit, they've got a lot of top-end talent. I think the floor of Bayern's squad's a little bit weak, and I have some questions around their midfield. If Oberdorf isn't fit, they've lost Stanway as well, that midfield would be a bit of a concern. But if everyone's fit, they're a great side. Ket and Gwyn is a lovely combination of fullbacks. Yeah, I think they've got some quality talent in there. And as you say, the Bundesliga is significantly weakened this year. It's not just Wolfsburg who've got worse. You've got Eintracht Frankfurt who have lost the core really of their team as well. So yeah, I think Bayern is a really good shout. I think they've got a great chance of going deep. They went deep last year, I think in that semi-final against Barcelona. If Ket and Barkla don't get sent off in the first leg, I think they had a really good chance of getting something in that second leg. I don't think they'd have beaten Lyonnais in the final, but they weren't that far off last season. So if the draw is nice for them again, and they can get into semis and get into the final, and yeah, I think they've got the players there that they have an opportunity. Whether or not the floor of that squad is good enough is I think the bigger question.
Love it. With all of the moves made in the WSL, we saw Brighton be able to they've always kind of done those like stealthy, sneaky moves. Fantastic management. Their tactics, like you never really know how to deal with them. I remember a friend of mine, Lauren Tottenham, she goes to all the meetings and things, and it was the end of last season. They were talking about, no, 2 seasons ago. They're talking about how they still think the club is like 5 to 7 years away from challenging, and that really made the the fan base sad because that's not really what you want to hear. But to see the moves that they have made, obviously a lot still has to happen for them. This is the most sane the club has felt in a while, and lots of hope. And they showed promise last season at moments. Adding on to it, we have these new teams who have come in. The league is 14 now. 2 more teams, more games, so that's a larger possibility of chaos happening. Before I guess you get to who is most impressed, do you think any of this movement changes anything, or is it always just going to be, well, not always, but at least this upcoming season, is it just Arsenal, Chelsea, City, and then everybody else is kind of fighting for those problems?
Yeah, I think we've got a real bottleneck in the WSL. I think the fact that because European football only goes to the top 3 teams, and we don't have, obviously in the men's game, there's Europa League, there's Conference League. In the Premier League now, you just need to finish in the top 10 and you'll probably get Europe. But in the WSL, it's 3 teams. So you've got a bit of a bottleneck because Arsenal, Chelsea and City already have the biggest fan bases and the highest revenues and the biggest investment, really, outside of probably London City Lionesses. And they're also then getting Champions League revenue, which makes it much easier then to have a much higher wage bill. And traditionally, the league table tends to reflect the wage bill. And so, yeah, I think those 3 teams are still very strong. I think what will make it quite interesting is that I think there's now a very decent group of teams who can regularly take points off them. I think when you're looking at Brighton, we know how good they are at taking points off the big teams. I think Liverpool even, they held Man City for 90 minutes right at the end of the season before Kang scored, and that changed the course of the title race there, or just gave City or held City on there in that late moment. I think Tottenham are a side who will be able to do it more consistently this year. And London City and Man United are both teams. I mean, Man United should be clear 4th anyway, but they're both very strong teams as well. So you've got a lot of teams now that can take points off the big clubs. You mentioned there Brighton. Brighton I find very interesting because they are very good at beating the big teams. And I think Perisic is such a good tactician, but they don't seem to be good enough at beating the smaller teams in the league. So many times last season they dropped I think one of the sides that drew with Leicester, which is just a really stupid place to drop points. I think there was another couple of results in there where I think West Ham, they lost that one away from home. They had so many results in there where they had a run at least, I think it was at the back end of the season, where they dropped points to loads of little teams, and then in the last 4 games of the season they played like United, Arsenal, City and Chelsea or something like that, and they got loads of points from that run. So they're really good at taking points off some of the smaller sides or some of the bigger teams in the league, but they're just not consistent enough against the weaker teams. I think Brighton could get 4th this year. I think there is a real chance that basically 5 teams could end up finishing 4th. But I think someone like United, because they don't have Champions League football, will be consistent enough. But outside of that, I think there is that mid-table pack. I think is really difficult to call at the moment.
I think what that midfield pack has done is that, although I agree, I expect it to be the same big 3 at the top, what it's done is it's added pressure and it's added a bit of a punishment. I think that you look at Arsenal. I think they've had a slow start to the season the last couple of years, and they only fell to 4th, 5th, and even in a bad season, you can still finish 3rd. But I think going into this season, if one of those 3 big clubs, if they start slow, they could be 6th, 7th, 8th in the table after a few matches, and suddenly you're in a very, very difficult spot because it won't be as easy to recover. So, yeah, I do expect it to be the same top 3. But if one of them doesn't get going, quickly, and if one of them has a bad run of form, then the other clubs like Brighton, as you say, like Tottenham, that they can be there to pick up the pieces. So I think that it's put a lot of the investment that we're seeing has put a lot of pressure on those 3 big clubs to get it right this season, because if they don't, then they could be in a bit of trouble.
I'm going to try and be a little bit fair to Vidicic. I think that run of games, Jack, that you mentioned was during the time that his father passed. So I know that like they did not go on a great run of form, like in that next when he was away from when Vidicic was away from the team. But I think he might be my the most tactically interesting manager in the WSL. I don't know if you necessarily agree with that or not, but for me, he's the one that I would like if I were a larger club, I would have my eye on him, like to say like, okay, if we need to let our coach go, this is the coach that I'm gonna pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've done a couple of videos now on Dario Vidicic, which self-plug, go and check those out. But yeah, I think he's such a good manager. I think the way Brighton play is really fun to watch. You need very specific players to make it work, and I think if a top club was going to go in for him, you've got to accept that, and you've got to really build into what he's going to want and sign the kind of players that he needs. But yeah, I think he's got everything to succeed at a top club. I really like the way that Brighton team plays. I think their combinations are really excellent. Positional rotation's really strong. And yeah, the way they're able to move the ball so effectively is, yeah, they're really fun to watch. I think they've got some great players as well. Particularly a big fan of Nadia Krejiman, who they've signed this summer. I think they really needed some more threat in the final third, and they haven't really done that up front. Emily Murphy's an interesting signing from Newcastle, but yeah, I think signings like Krejiman, they got Olaf Vedson in January, and she's played, I think, about 200 minutes. Barely played for them back after the season, which is a bit of a shame. But I think, she's going to feel like a new signing next season. So, yeah, they're a really fun team. I think they've done some good business. And I think above all else, they've held on to their talent really effectively. There was a big question mark around whether Maisie Simmons would move on this summer. I think Mweka Minami's another one who top clubs could be interested in. Chiamaka Anadozie, for me, is one of the top 3 goalkeepers in the world. So the fact that she's at Brighton, it just feels incredible to me that no one else has looked at her and signed her before they got her on a free transfer. So the fact no one else looked at that and picked her up feels crazy to me. But yeah, lots to like about that Brighton team. And that's why I think when you look at it, they haven't done as much business this summer. Bouty as well, another one who I haven't mentioned, is a good pickup. They haven't done loads of business this summer, but they've supplemented the squad nicely. And I think they are tactically better than a lot of the teams around them. I think with Tottenham, there's a question around it being Ho's second season. Will they start to get figured out? I think with London City, I'm yet to see anything from Eda Maestre as a manager that excites me or gives me any faith in his ability to coach Putellas and players like that. So I think that's going to be a big question. And I think Liverpool are another side who, because they've got Gareth Taylor there, who has been there and done it. I know City fans are not going to be happy, but I think he is a good coach and ultimately probably should have won a WSL title. That went right when Stina Blackstenia scored right at the end of the Arsenal City game a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think you've got shaking your head at me there. But yeah, I think that can make the difference.
Yeah, that is what I'm very much enjoying is the manager situation in all these teams. Garrett Taylor, agreed. Definitely think at his time with City, there should have been more trophies lifted while he was there. Tactician, he's there. His man management, woman management, leaves a lot to be desired. That is kind of the easiest way that we can put it in just seeing the way that Andre Jeggy, as we love to call him, has handled the players and the way that he handles the media. It really is kind of like a night and day. I do think Garrett Taylor being at a place like Liverpool where, frankly, they're kissing his ass and they're making him feel super welcoming and things like that. Like he needs that. I really do think that he needs to feel at his most comfortable because when Chloe started making things hot for him at City before she forced her exit out of the club, you could definitely see like Garrett Taylor's hair was getting all disheveled and he was like sniffing at media. It was like a side of him that I had never seen before. And it was very interesting. Liverpool being in a better spot, like even that just for women's football and names that you recognize. Like it's good to have Liverpool in and around there. Like how well will they do this season? Nobody knows. But yeah, I really like Vidicic. I like that he puts belief in his players and in the fan base. And obviously by holding on to players, they believe that information. The team is relatively young. Obviously they have some veteran players that can help push people the right direction. But yeah, I'm hoping they do well against everybody but City. Like that is where the homerism in me comes. It's just like, you know what? Beat everybody but us. Just like let us get back to back. I'm not really expecting much when it comes to Champions League. I'm just excited to be there. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to everything. Yeah, Tom?
I want to keep on Brighton. I know that the club has announced that they're building a stadium in Brighton specifically for their women's team, and like that's going to be the first one, I believe, in all of Europe that's specifically built for a women's football club. As someone who lives in the city where they built the first specific stadium for women's football in the world, I know that has a big impact in the type of players that you can bring in, and that profile is just higher just because the facilities are specifically dedicated to them. Are we going to start seeing more players start to buy into that Brighton project? Maybe not this season, but like in 2-3 windows when the stadium's closer to completion?
I think it's really interesting. For me, I'm a little bit with the stadium situation because they're building it off of the Amex. So they're building it's like a separate stadium, but it's connected to the Amex. It feels a little bit pointless to me. I think if you're building a new stadium in a completely different area, then fair enough. But it does feel like they could have just played at the Amex and slowly built up the fan base there. I like the fact you're going to have that connection between the two clubs, and I think the fact they were playing at Crawley for the last few years doesn't really make any sense because that's not Brighton. So moving them into Brighton is going to be important. But yeah, it does feel to me that they could have just played at the Amex. Their men's team isn't a side who are regularly playing in the Champions League. So it's not like that pitch is getting the amount of use that some other clubs are getting on it. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I thought that London City would probably be the side that built a stadium first, just because they don't have one and they're currently playing at Bromley. Which, I mean, the fact they're able to attract star players like that to Bromley does show their pulling power. And I think that will be interesting if they can build a stadium that's a bit more in a bit more of a central location. But yeah, I think Brighton they've done well to attract players anyway. As I mentioned with Enadozi, I think that's a big pickup. They've got players like Frank Kirby and Leah Falty. I think where they're positioned is really handy as well because they're not too far from London. It's I think a very welcoming city as well. So yeah, I think it makes it a very good destination for players to want to go to, and I think players will really buy into the vision that Brighton have. They've made it clear that they want to be at the sharp end of women's football. They're going about it in a very different way to some of the other clubs, where they're building this infrastructure first and slowly growing the team rather than trying to buy a football team and then build a fan base, which is how certain other clubs are going about it. So yeah, I think I really like what Brighton are building, and they're really building around a manager there in Vidicic as well, who, as much as I'd love to see him in a top job, I kind of hope he just stays at Brighton and builds that club up with him.
Yeah. I've always talked about on the men's side, when will Brighton take their men's side serious enough to make those real runs? When are they going to like actually hold on to a player instead of trying to sell them like hand over foot, which I understand makes the money? We're seeing what it looks like on the Brighton women's side, and I'm hoping maybe they can find some sort of, figure out what success for them means, and that can maybe lead to the men's side doing something similar.
So I know we kind of talked about, like, obviously there's a top three, there's a good middle class. It was kind of nice last season where we didn't have a revolving door of the team that came up was the team that went right back down. Is this season gonna like return back to form, like where one of the three teams that did get promoted is like grand opening, grand closing sort of thing?
Well, because there's three teams, someone has to stay up. So that definitely does help with that, to be fair. I think when you're adding three teams in the WSL2, there is a decent quality gap at the moment between the two leagues. So you're naturally going to have 3 teams that are a little bit weaker. But I don't think they'll be completely uncompetitive. When you look at how Palace have recruited this time compared to how they recruited 2 years ago, they seem to have not only have they got a stronger squad coming into the league, they seem to have a much better understanding of the kind of players they need to be able to compete. I think signings like Beth England and Lexi Lloyd-Smith and even Shannon O'Brien are really nice pickups. Obviously, Mike Carter being out for them with an ACL injury, a massive loss, but they've got a good manager as well in Joe Potter, and I think they're buying players that really suit her style of play. I think with Birmingham, the amount of money they put in already, they bought Vilma Laidamar and Ayoto Miyagawa in the Championship, or in the WSL2, I should say. They've also signed this summer players like Millie Turland and Lisa Nalsoon, who, while aren't flashy names, they're WSL experienced players who aren't going to want to go down to the WSL2. So yeah, I think there's a real good chance that at least one of them, I mean, obviously one of them has to stay up. I think there's a really good chance that 2 of them stay up, because I think with the playoff system, that most of them are stronger than anyone who could come up through the WSL2. So yeah, I think there's a really good chance that at least 2 of them stay up. I think for me, there is kind of guaranteed that one of them's going to finish bottom. But because you look at clubs like Everton and West Ham, and who I would say are the closest clubs to being dragged into that, and I think both of them should be okay this season. So yeah, I think there is a chance that all 3 of them stay up, but I think it's more like, I think one of them has to stay up, of course. I think there's a good chance that we see at least 2 of them stay up.
I think the positive thing that is different to that revolving door kind of stage, as you said, is that even if one of them or 2 of them do go down this year, I think we'll get a fight. You know, the last few years with that revolving door, when Palace first came up initially, they were relegated with a few games to go. It was the same with teams like Reading and Bristol City. But I think
even Leicester last season, who hadn't just come out, but because they had no money, and I mean their whole club's a bit of a mess at the moment. They lost so many players, and they were just as weak.
Yeah, and I think that even if a side, say Charlton do struggle, I think that they'll be in it till the very end. They'll give it a good fight. It will be relatively tight with at least 1 or 2 games to go. So yeah, I think even if we do end up losing 2 clubs, two of the 3 clubs, I think they'll at least put up a fight, and the playoff game will be very interesting. So yeah, it's overall, I'm expecting a much stronger relegation fight, even if we do end up with the WSL2 sides going back down. So overall, it's really good to have them in the league, and yeah, hopefully they can deliver.
Do you think that just based off of style of play, that Charlton would be the front runner of the 3 promoted teams to go back down, just because they want to sit in and they don't really necessarily care if they score just the 1 goal, as long as they score the 1 goal and you don't score any. Whereas Crystal Palace and Birmingham, they seemed more willing to play with these other teams. Or does that mean that they might get run off the pitch? Do you have any kind of read on who would be most likely to go back down of those 3?
I think less for style of play, but more because of their lack of investment and the lack of money. I think Charlton are in a little bit of trouble when you look at the signings they've made this summer. There's a lot of loan moves in there, a lot of free transfers, and I would say they're players who are on lower wages and players who aren't at the same quality as some of the signings that Palace and Birmingham have been able to make. But I actually think in terms of style of play, the way that Charlton play, the way that they will frustrate opponents, could make a big difference if they can just sit in and really frustrate teams. Teams like Birmingham Palace, and even you look at London City last season, they lost their opening matches 5-1 and 5-0 to the likes of United and Arsenal. I think they got beaten quite heavily by City on one of the occasions as well. So they played a very aggressive play style, but because they had the quality to match that, they were okay. The big question around Birmingham or especially Birmingham, but I guess also Crystal Palace, if they are going to play a little bit more aggressively, have they got the quality to back that up? So at least with the way that Charlton are playing, they're playing within the limits of what their players are capable of. And while that may not be to play really exciting attacking football, Karen Hills is a manager who's been here and done it before. She knows how to keep clubs in the WSL. And so there is a chance that makes the big difference, and she's able to build a very defensively solid Charlton team, and they can grind out enough results. But I just think there's such a quality gap there. I think Charlton needed some big signings, and it just hasn't happened for them, really. And so I think for me, they are the favourites at the moment to go down.
Also, I'm gonna I know, Jackie, we had talked about there not being a Europa competition on the women's side. But just if we were to make the hypothetical that Europa competition did exist on the women's side, would a WSL team be the team most likely to win that competition based off of where all of the other, upper middle class teams of all of the other leagues in Europe currently sit?
Yeah, I think when you look at so obviously Europa Cup is the closest thing we've got at the moment. So teams qualify for the Europa Cup, it's by getting knocked out of the Champions League qualifiers. I mean, there's a slight chance that if Chelsea were to lose their qualifier, they could end up being in the Europa Cup. I think they would. I think they'd win it quite comfortably. The teams that were in it last year, Frankfurt, very good side, but I mean they've lost a lot of players this summer. Herken, likewise, have just lost their star player and Felicia Schroeder. Hammarby are a very decent team, but they've lost a lot of players over the last year. So yeah, there are some good teams at that level of the competition. I think if we were to have a fully fledged Europa League, though, yeah, I don't see. If you look at I've said this a lot on the channel, but the teams from like 4th to 9th in the WSL, for me, they qualify for Champions League football in the Bundesliga, in the Premier League, in Liga F. I think they'd be top 3 clubs in those leagues. So yeah, I think whoever you would put in there, if it was a Man United, if it's a Tottenham, if it's a London City, a Brighton, Liverpool, I think all of those teams would be good enough to win a sort of theoretical Europa League.
Exactly. I think that the best example is that realistically, that if they had the Europa League, 4th place in the league would go into it. That would have been Manchester United last season, and I don't think they would have been challenged until they got to the semi-finals. And then even so, I mean, the Europa Cup at the moment has a 2-legged final, so if anything, that would make it even easier for a WSL club to go all the way. So yeah, I definitely think that if a WSL team did end up in a weaker European competition, they would have it pretty comfortably until maybe the very end of the competition.
But I think if there was a world where Chelsea got knocked out in qualifiers and they were in the Europa Cup, they would play their second string team in that competition and they would still win it. So yeah, I think there is a big disparity at the moment. At the top end, those leagues are able to compete with Barcelona and Lyon and Bayern Munich. But I think the lower down that league you go, there is a big quality disparity. We see it in the Liga F. No one really challenges Barcelona. We see it in the Premier League where no one really challenges Lyon. So, yeah, I think the WSL is much stronger. And that's why we kind of speak of that bottle cap or your bottleneck, because you've got about 9 teams in the WSL, or at least 8 teams in the WSL who should be or could be qualifying for European competitions and are strong enough to really take some of the top European teams to force. But they're not going to be able to get there because there's only 3 qualification spots for the Champions League.
Well, before we get you out of here, I did kind of want to talk about the ownership of the WSL, WPLL. Since taking over, they have made some moves that, like logo and branding, however you feel about the new logo, however you feel about the branding, they have gotten the consistency. Honestly, even with the playoff game between the relegation and promotion, I absolutely love that. That is just another way of getting people locked in to a game at the end of the season. It adds jeopardy. It made me pay, like, this is the most I paid attention to the WSL2 last season than like ever, when it was because of the fact that there's going to be this relegation promotion, the extra 2 teams and things like that. I know the start times for games and the broadcasting, how they went at that wasn't the best last season. What are you seeing from them? Were there any moves made this summer, or is there something that you want to see from the company to help grow the brand, the company that is WSL?
Yeah, I think a lot of what they did is quite positive. I think the branding is a bit superficial. I think the new logo is also just a bit pointless. I actually prefer the just lettering of the WSL under their logo, which I think looks way better than that weird circly thing. I think the WSL2, I don't like the name, but I really love the fact that they are pushing it more. I think when you look at things like, there's supposed to be a fully licensed WSL fantasy game this year, and there's rumours that it will have both the WSL and WSL2 in, which is very interesting, but it does kind of force you to have to watch the WSL2 if you're interested in playing that game, because there's going to be players in there who are going to get loads of points. So yeah, I think the way that they've integrated that is really nicely. It is really nice. I like the fact, so there was obviously the new broadcast deal that was announced on Thursday, or not the new broadcast deal, but the change of the broadcast times. I think that's a big positive. So the reintroduction of the Sunday evening slot, the use more of the Saturday evening slot, and the fact they're going to be putting games on Friday evenings. I think all of them are big positives. I think you're never going to find a time that works for everyone every week, but by having lots of different times, it makes it so much more accessible for everyone. And I think it was so pointless last season when you'd have 4 games all kicking off at the same time because you can only really watch one. So you then create a situation where not only can fans not watch all those different games, but the viewing figures also look much lower because fans are having to watch or pick between one of those 4 games rather than watching them all at different times in the weekend. So yeah, I think they're making some really good changes. I think where they are kind of letting down English football is the fact that it doesn't extend below in the pyramid. And I think the National League, there's a lot of gripes there in the 3rd tier that they're not really getting the same level of, or the interest, and not really getting the same level of investment. And I think there is a major concern there, particularly when there's talk of them putting the WSL Academy teams into the 3rd tier. I think that's a really poor look. And so, yeah, I think there will be some interesting questions around how they go about handling things like that. So, yeah, I think a lot of what they've done for the WSL and WSL2 is really good, but the question is how that's going to impact some of the smaller teams in England.
Yeah, exactly my point. I think that they've got to be careful. They don't cut off the grassroots game with those tiers below, because you don't want it to become where you've got, as much as it would be great to have 2 really strong leagues, if everything else below that is kind of in the shadow, then that's not really what you want. In the men's game, you've got 4 or 5 leagues that are played to a very, very decent standard. So it'll be interesting how that goes. But broadly, I think they've done pretty well. I think that this season was the perfect season to extend the league. I think that you look at the clubs who have come up, and we spoke about it a moment ago, but you're looking at 3 teams that have got enough to give it a go. If they'd extended a couple years ago, then the new teams that were coming in would have just got smashed every single week. They'd have lost 4, 5, 6-0 every single game, and it'd been pointless. But this year, I think they picked the perfect time to make the league bigger. And then, of course, because they've made the league bigger, they needed more kickoff time. So I think going into this season, they've got quite a lot right. And yeah, I think it's, as you say, there's always going to be things they get wrong, but that's expected. They're not going to get every single little thing right. But on the whole, going into this campaign, they've set it up quite nicely that both the WSL and the WSL2 are going to be very exciting to watch.
Yeah, agreed. I do think that the idea of playing all the games at the same time and early to try to avoid the chaos of they were like, there's no need to choose between the men's and the women's game because the women's game is first. But it's like either way, especially if the games are away, like sometimes they're not always both home type of situation. The people still were having to make decisions. And I can't tell you how many times I saw our friends at Man City Women's, their supporter group, waking up at like 5 a.m. to make sure they make it to London in time for the kickoff. And like, the thing I remember the most from my visit to England was I'm a morning person. So like I'm up, I'm moving around, and I just remember walking around Manchester being like, where is everybody? Like I know like the morning isn't necessarily your favorite time of the day, or at least you like to gather yourself. So the idea of like games kicking off at noon, we see it in the men's game all the time. That noon game is always, let's say 8.5 times out of 10, it's usually the worst match of the day because everyone's really just starting to get the blood flowing and they're awake. And you definitely saw it in a lot of some of these WSL games. So having them staggered gives people plenty of opportunity. I'm really hoping that the numbers go up. What do you think?
Because you were cannibalizing your viewership essentially. Exactly. Like when you're making like 4 matches against each other, like it's not like all of them can boost each other. You're taking away from what any one match viewership numbers could do. Or attendance numbers in some instances.
Well, and that one last thing, because I want to focus on the whole attendance numbers of it all, because There was huge conversation about that after the end of last season. How technically attendance rose, but if you take out Arsenal, it dropped, and having to rely on Arsenal and in the decision of like Chelsea announced that they're going to start playing more games at Stamford, where City on the other end have only announced that 2 of their games are going to be at the Etihad. They're going to try to focus on growing the joy. When I talk to a lot of friends, especially like Tottenham fans, like they don't travel the best. So it's just like, how is trying to get the stadiums filled? Is that more of a league trying to figure out a situation? Is it the clubs themselves need to like spend more on the marketing when it comes to the women's side? Like, what would you want to see? Are you seeing it to help connect and get more fans into the stadiums?
I think there's lots of great schemes. I mean, I look at Aston Villa, they've done a lot to try and engage their community. And I think there's lots of things you can do like that. I think the biggest thing is just time. I think that it is going to take a big culture shift to have a lot of people interested in women's football, because there are a lot of people who just would look at the fact it's women's football and not be interested.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with more and more time, that is going to change. And I think with the younger generation, the fact that women's football is so normalized now, it's on mainstream television, it's broadcast alongside the men's game, not hidden away, and you've not got to search up the results and scroll to the last at the bottom of the page or something to find it. It is there, it is present. I think that's going to make a big shift, and I think that we'll see a massive change in attitudes towards it, and I think that we'll see attendances rise naturally. I think moving to big stadiums is great, but you've got to be able to kind of back that up. Arsenal have done that very well. I think that, clubs like even Aston Villa have done very nicely. Villa with a lot of their community stuff, with the fact that they offer loyalty points for the men's team for going to watch women's team games. I think that's a great thing to try and build that one club mentality. And as much as some fans will then just buy the ticket and go and they're not really interested in the game, at least they are. I mean, they're still having to spend the money to go there. They're still having to sit in the seat. At least they're going to the game. So I think Chelsea Moves the Bridge were really interesting this year, because the attendances at Stamford Bridge haven't been incredible when they have been there. But I think a lot of that is that because it's only 2 or 3 times a year, if you're used to going to Kings Meadow every week and then a couple times a year going to Stamford Bridge, it is you may not be able to get to the bridge if you live really close to Kings Meadow. So yeah, I hope with that becoming a more regular thing, and Chelsea are going to play every game at Stamford Bridge, that they will then be able to build a similar set level attendance as Arsenal. I think as well, people forget that Arsenal, as much as they, a lot of their headlines have been quite recent in terms of selling out the Emirates and getting 60,000 people and having a super high average attendance, they've been getting really strong attendances for 20 years. And they started building things 20 years ago. And so I think with more than anything else, it just takes time. Once you've got a competitive team and they're winning things, people will go and watch them. Tottenham saw a big spike last season because they're watching their men's team was depressing, but watching their women's team was fun. So people went and watched the women's team. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is that it's just going to take time.
Yeah, exactly that. I think that what women's football now wants to try and shift into is that I think, especially with England winning the Euros, back to back, a lot of people jumped on that. They watched the summer, they watched through the summer, they watched the World Cup, and then they're kind of like what we call a fair weather fan, really, where they watch here bits here and there. But I think what it wants to develop now is what you get in the men's game, where clubs have got massive followings. You've got thousands upon thousands of people who would bleed and fight for their football team, and I think that's what you want to get. You want to get into the women's game in terms of you want that big fan base that are going to follow the team home and away, and yet that takes time. You're not going to find 40,000 people to sell out Stamford Bridge in a day. It is going to take time, but as I say, if teams are winning, Pitt will go and watch. If things are going well, Pitt will go and watch them. And I think that if Chelsea are back on it this year, if City as well did quite well with winning the league. Arsenal again, they're back up there. I think if the league is really competitive at both ends, people are going to turn up. I think the other thing that helped this year is that Birmingham will do pretty well, especially being at the games that are at St Andrews, and that will be a big part of it. So, and
their derby with Aston Villa, because their men's team haven't played in years, because Birmingham have been stuck in League One and trying to build their way up. that derby's going to be massive. But yeah, I think there will be. I think we'll see attendances go up again. I think a lot of the criticism this year was that we came out of a major tournament and we didn't see the same kind of boom after the Euros in 2022, hosted in England. We saw a massive boom of spike in people watching it and getting engaged in the game. After the World Cup in 2023, we saw another big spike. We didn't see that same sort of spike, but it was a Euros not played on home soil. I think people forget how big an impact that had. The fact that the Women's Euros was in England. This was played in Switzerland. England's games weren't the most fun to watch, if I'm being honest. I think they kind of very much grinded out results in that. And I think the World Cup will have a much bigger impact. The World Cup is so much more important to the generic fan than the Euros is. You know, Manan's not going to sit there and watch the Euros, but she watches the World Cup and cheers on watches every single game of it. So, yeah, I think for the general fan, the World Cup is absolutely massive. And I think that coming back around, being in Brazil as well, which is such a country with such a culture of football and history in football, I think it's going to be a fantastic tournament.
And I think that even this season, even if we don't see, and I think the same maybe going into World Cup, but even if we don't see the average attendances go up massively, I think that there will be more games that are sellouts or more games where you get a big crowd. And you mentioned the Birmingham derby there, and even if teams don't average that attendance every game, I think that we'll see a lot more games where the stadium is packed out, or and I think we will see a lot of records broken for individual clubs, smashing their highest attendances. And I think that again, it's all one odd. The Women's FA Cup final, that attendance was down, but that was between Man City and Brighton. Obviously, City are having to come all the way down from London, and Brighton, while a bit closer to London, they're not one of the massive teams in the country.
The men's team will struggle to sell out Wembley.
Yeah, if you look at Chelsea, Arsenal, it's a sellout. Obviously,
Chelsea Man United was pretty high as well, because you've got two big fan bases there. One based in London. United have a lot of fans based in London, so it's easier then to sell out Wembley. But yeah, I'm confident we'll see attendances rise again next season, and I think especially after the World Cup in 2027, I think we'll see it go up again.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, through here, I was taking notes and I was like, oh, I forgot to ask about this. I forgot to ask about that. That's a good thing. That means we'll just have to have
you guys back.
Have to have you back. This was wonderful. Hopefully you enjoyed yourselves. Please plug yourselves. Let people know where they can find you and the things that y'all do.
Yeah, with the Women's Football Chat on every platform. We have YouTube is obviously where most of our content is. We have 2 videos out every week. We have a live show every Monday. We have live watch-alongs for all the WPLL games, so all the ones that are on TV and not free on YouTube in the UK. So yeah, lots of content every week. We're also on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Trying to think if there's any other social medias that we have, but yeah, we're on everything as a Women's Football Chat. Search for that and you should find us. But yeah, lots of content coming up with the WSL returning. Can't wait to get back to it.
Love it. Oh, well, thank you, Shady Gang. We will see you all soon with the season starting. So until then, you know the vibes. Shady Gang, Shady Gang, Shady Gang.